Sandor Clegane was just a boy, half the size of his towering brother Gregor, when fire first came for him. It slithered across his flesh like a living thing, a hungry serpent of heat that warped and melted the skin on one side of his face. He remembered screaming until no sound would come, and the way Gregor's grip felt like iron as he shoved him into the brazier. Each breath then was the taste of ashes and terror. Yet it was that same fire, that same agony, which would forge him into something far greater than any would have imagined. The realm's fiercest, most unyielding warrior. In a life measured by pain, Sandor's awakening began in the castle yard of House Clegane. It was a gray place, solemn, no place for children's laughter or innocence. The walls held the echo of every shout Gregor had ever uttered and every blow he had struck. Servants went about their tasks in hushed dread, lest the mountain notice them. And Sandor, smaller and too young to protect himself, learned to keep his head down. But the day Gregor scarred him, Sandor understood that fear would chew him alive if he let it. For weeks, he huddled in his darkened chamber, face swathed in bandages that clung to his wounds. The pain refused to subside. His dreams were full of fire's roar. Yet in the swirl of nightmares, a flicker of defiance kindled. Why should the flames that devoured him once have the right to devour him again and again, night after night? When he rose from his bed to test his body, he did so in secret. He stayed near the forges, of all places, letting his heart pound in his chest at the glow of coal and ember. His breathing grew short, his pulse hammered, but he did not look away. Over time, the blacksmith noticed the scrawny boy lurking. Instead of chasing him off, the man showed him how to handle hot metal with tongs and gloves. To shape it, you must face the heat, the blacksmith said. Steel cowered from fire until a guiding hand gave it purpose. In Sandor's mind, an idea began to bloom. To conquer his fear, he must face it, like steel before the forge. With no teacher but the blacksmith's occasional tips, he tested himself. At first, the very hiss and spit of molten metal made him flinch. His scarred cheek tightened with phantom pain. He would sweat as though in fever whenever the flames roared too high. But he did not flee. Each day, he forced himself closer, let his senses adjust to the searing light and withering heat. He learned to fear it, yes, but not to bow to it. The castle's master-at-arms noticed the boy's frequent visits to the smithy and offered to train him in the yard. "You have the look of a beaten dog," he remarked. "But beaten dogs sometimes bite the hardest." Sandor's pride bristled. He seized the chance. He would learn to fight, to hold a sword as though it belonged there, to land a blow that would make even Gregor pause. The boy grew taller, leaner, each bruise marking a lesson learned. He nursed his aches in the evenings, scowling at the flame of a lone candle until his breath steadied. He would not let himself quake before fire again. One day, Gregor caught sight of Sandor training. The mountain paused, eyes narrowed beneath his helm. Sandor felt an icicle of fear slip down his spine, an echo of that old terror. Gregor snorted and turned away as though what he saw was hardly worth noting. The day might have ended there were it not for a rare spark of curiosity in the older brother. He beckoned a stable boy to him and spoke in a low tone. The next morning, Sandor's training dummy was found torn to pieces, hacked as if by a monstrous blade. A warning, or perhaps a jest, from Gregor to remind Sandor who reigned in the house. Sandor's gut nodded, but he refused to shrink away. He honed himself like a sword, forging a brutal discipline in the practice yard. At night, the nightmares still found him, but each morning he awoke a fraction more resolute. He would not be broken again. Fire had taken half his face, yet the other half remained. That half belonged to him, and so did his life. Fate soon carried him beyond the grim walls of House Clegane. When the family traveled to King's Landing to answer a royal summons, Sandor entered a world of color and noise he had only heard whispers of. The Red Keep's turrets rose high, the streets teemed with hawkers and cup-purses. The stench of the city clashed with the perfumed halls of nobles. Sandor felt out of place among them, too young and too scarred to belong. Yet his eyes gleamed with a quiet hunger. He was determined to learn to measure the so-called knights who strutted about in shining armor. A tourney was announced to celebrate the king's name day. Gregor was among those favored to win. Sandor yearned to test himself, but as an unknighted boy, he had no formal place in the lists. Sneers and laughter met him when he asked if he might join the squire's melee. You, with half your face melted away? One squire scoffed, smirking. That smirk vanished when Sandor bested him in a quick spar behind the stables, driving the boy to yield in 3 blows. Word reached the master-at-arms of the Red Keep, who considered it amusing enough to let the scarred Clegane boy step into the ring. So on the day of the squire's melee, Sandor stood among peers who eyed him as an interloper. The wooden stands were packed with cheering crowds, lords and ladies placing wagers, while the king himself, Robert Baratheon, watched from a gilded box. Sandor's heart pounded beneath his breastplate. He felt the old fear gnaw at him, not of the knights or the crowd, but of failure, of letting himself be consumed by dread once more. He inhaled, recalling the heat of the forge, the way steel and flame collided. He would not shrink. The melee began in a mad swirl of wooden swords. Boys clashed, battered each other, stumbled in the dirt. Sandor moved swiftly, parrying blows and delivering them back with cold precision. He had no time for fancy flourishes. One squire lunged at him, another tried a blow from behind. He met both with savage efficiency, leaving them sprawled. Bit by bit, the ring emptied. Each victory fanned a small pride in his chest. He fought with an edge that the other boys lacked, a stark refusal to be beaten down. When only 2 remained, Sandor and a tall lad from the Westerlands, the stands grew hushed. The other boy's face showed uncertainty. He'd seen Sandor carve through the field as though possessed. They squared off. The boy struck hard, a blow that would have staggered most. Sandor absorbed it on his shield, thrust forward, slammed his pommel into the lad's gut, and followed with a strike across the head. Down he went. The hush shattered into cheers and applause. King Robert roared in approval, his booming laughter echoing across the yard. And from the corner of the stands, Gregor watched, arms folded, helm in his lap. Sandor felt a spark of triumph when he caught Gregor's gaze, though the mountain's expression was as stony as ever. That day, Sandor won not only the squire's melee but also the notice of the court. Rumors flew of the burned boy who moved with lethal grace. Some whispered that he was half-mad, that only a madman could shrug off pain so easily. Others said it was fury that drove him, a hatred for his brother that fueled every swing. Sandor kept his own counsel. He did not speak of what lit the fire in his chest. He only knew that each victory chipped away at the hold fear once had upon him. King Robert, drunk on mead and excitement, summoned Sandor. "You're the pup of House Clegane?" he bellowed, clapping the youth on the shoulder. Sandor nodded, stiff and uneasy before such royal attention. "Ha! I see Gregor's brood isn't all monstrous. Or maybe you are. That was some fine fighting." The king laughed, looking to his courtiers who nodded agreement or feigned it. "Aye," Robert mused, "perhaps the lad's a hound that doesn't back down." And so the name the Hound stuck, echoing in the corridors wherever Sandor passed. He resented it at first. It felt like a reminder that he was less than a knight, just a dog that fought and bled at the command of others. But as time passed, he came to wear it like a shield. The Hound. Let them call him that. Dogs could guard their own, bite those who threatened them. A dog was loyal, or so the song said, but Sandor's loyalty, if it existed, was a complicated thing. It had been battered, burned, and hardened by life's cruelties. Yet if he must bear a name, he decided it would be on his terms. Summer turned to autumn, and King Robert's court became rife with intrigue. Sandor lingered on the edges, indifferent to the scheming. Lords tried to tempt him with promises of squireship or coin, but he shook his head. He wanted no part of their maneuverings. He lived for the clang of steel and the stillness just before a blade struck home. Underneath the Red Keep's vaulted ceilings, he honed his craft. Each day, he drilled with knights who saw him as either a curiosity or a threat. He learned from their mistakes and refined his strengths. Some saw his scar and assumed him broken until he bested them. In private, though, he remained at war with his nightmares. The memory of fire seared him in sleep, the hiss of flesh burning echoing in the darkness. He would wake drenched in sweat, gasping. He fought to reclaim calm by staring into the small hearth in his chamber, letting the crackle of flames wash over him. No, he told himself, this will not rule you. He thought of the blacksmith's words, how steel only gains strength in the heat. Slowly, that lesson took root in him. Fear became a tool he could wield, a reminder that he had survived worse than any knight might threaten him with. His skill became such that, even though he was no knight, the king's guard took note. Ser Barristan and Selmy, honorable and kind compared to the others, often studied Sandor in the practice yard. "You've a talent for reading your opponent," Ser Barristan commented one morning after Sandor dispatched 2 knights in a row. "It's almost as if you see the blow before it's struck." Sandor shrugged, uncertain how to explain that his entire being was attuned to violence, that vigilance was a habit forged by the presence of a monstrous brother and the memory of flame. King Robert's hunts were legendary, rowdy affairs full of bawdy jokes and barrels of ale. On one such hunt, Sandor was summoned to ride alongside the king's retinue more as a show of force than any real necessity. They ventured deep into the Kingswood where boars and stags roamed. The thick canopy filtered sunlight and the bark of hounds echoed through the trees. Robert reveled in it, bellowing oaths and laughter at every turn as though he were still the warrior who had claimed the throne by battle. Sandor kept near the edges, watchful for threats, be it a wild boar or a sly assassin, though the latter seemed unlikely. Then came a moment when the hounds flushed out a massive boar, its tusks gleaming with savage intent. Robert, drunk on mead, bellowed for the men to stay back. He would face it alone, he declared. All eyes turned to the king, but the boar charged faster than expected. Instinct overcame caution. Sandor spurred his horse forward. Before Robert could bring his spear to bear, Sandor maneuvered, twisting in the saddle to angle his blade at the boar's flank. The beast squealed, veering off. The king hurled curses and stumbled in the mud, narrowly avoiding being gored. In the end, Robert delivered the final thrust, claiming the kill as his own. But he did not forget that the hound had intervened, saving him from serious harm. At the feast that night, Robert raised a mug in Sandor's honor. A damned fierce dog, he called him. But loyal, eh? There was laughter among the lords, and Sandor felt the weight of that expectation. Loyal, they said. He stared into the firelight, reflecting in his cup, remembering how loyalty to one's own blood had rewarded him with scarring. He drank in silence. The Queen's court was another realm entirely, all silks and whispers. Sandor did not care for the Lannisters, but Tywin Lannister's name loomed large in the corridors, and Gregor served that house in some capacity. Rumor had it that Tywin tolerated Gregor's cruelty because it was effective, because Gregor's presence quashed rebellions with fear. Sandor felt the old hatred stirring. He practiced harder, pushing his body to new limits. If ever the realm needed to stand against a beast like Gregor, Sandor would be ready. Word of border skirmishes reached King's Landing. Some brigands were pillaging villages under the mountain's banner, or so travelers whispered. The king, half occupied with his pleasures, sent a small party to investigate. Sandor quietly volunteered. Men murmured that it was because he wanted to test himself against Gregor, but his reasons were more complex. Even if Gregor was not personally leading these raids, the terror inflicted bore his stamp. Sandor rode out with a handful of knights and guards, the banner of the crown snapping overhead. In the villages they passed, they found charred cottages and broken bodies. Rage simmered in Sandor, the memory of his own skin burning fueling it. These atrocities had to be answered. They caught up to a band of outlaws who claimed to follow the mountain. The fight was brief and vicious. Sandor led the charge, steel flashing. Fear had no place here, only the clarity of purpose. A few men tried to strike from horseback with torches, hoping to spook their foes. Sandor's pulse did jump at the sight of flames, but he forced himself forward. If he let fire stop him, he might as well have died in Gregor's brazier years ago. He cut them down without mercy, though he took no pleasure in it, only grim satisfaction that it needed doing. When the day was done, the outlaws lay scattered, and the villagers thanked the royal men. Sandor avoided their gratitude. He did not see himself as a savior. He returned to King's Landing with a reputation growing like wildfire. Men spoke in awe of his bravery, his seeming immunity to fear, even of flames. The story circulated how a scarred warrior had advanced against torch-wielding outlaws without blinking. Some called him the perfect soldier, unstoppable, unflinching. The knights who prided themselves on chivalry found him unsettling. He had no desire for the courtly ideals of knighthood. He was simply effective. So it was that King Robert, after another evening of drink, approached Sandor with a slurred proposition: join his personal guard. Not the king's guard, for that was a sacred vow, but a position close to the king's side, a man whose sword Robert could rely upon. Sandor, wary of the political entanglements, hesitated. Yet there was a certain logic in it. If he wanted to keep an ear out for Gregor's movements, to be in the thick of the realm's affairs without entangling himself in knightly vows, this might be the way. And so he accepted becoming one of the most prominent faces among the Red Keep's protective ranks. On duty, he stood by the throne room's massive doors, enduring the spectacle of petty lords presenting grievances, listening to the gossip about the queen's rumored affairs, the crown's debts, the politics that soared above his station. He felt more comfortable in the training yard, wearing dents into his shield as he sparred with any knight brave enough to challenge him. He fought with a single-minded intensity that unsettled even the bold. Some claimed that in those moments they could see the reflection of fire dancing in his dark eyes. In truth, Sandor was not a mindless hound. He had his own code. He refused to do the petty intimidation tasks demanded by certain courtiers. When Queen Circe once asked him to frighten a servant girl who had overheard too much, he refused with a curt shake of his head, inciting the queen's displeasure. But he did not fear her. What could she do? Throw him to the flames? He had walked that road already and survived. Every so often, news of Gregor reached his ears. Another village terrorized, another suspect dragged off in chains by men wearing the mountain's sigil, 3 black dogs on a yellow field. The injustices weighed on Sandor, stoking the coals of his hatred. He used that fury in his practice, forging himself into the weapon that might one day face Gregor. For though they had crossed blades in the yard when they were younger, though Sandor had proven himself in the squire's melee, the true reckoning between them remained. Late at night, in his small chamber, Sandor sometimes lit a single candle and stared at the flame. He would lower his hand over it until he felt the sharp bite of heat. It reminded him of his purpose, that he had taken what Gregor did to him and turned it into strength. The next morning, with bruises from training throbbing, he felt no regret for the path he walked. Thus, as the realm churned with tensions, houses bickering, the crown's coffers draining, foreign whispers stirring across the sea, Sandor stood as an apex predator in King's Landing. The name, the Hound, was spoken in the same breath as terror or admiration, depending on who uttered it. Yet he remained, in many ways, isolated. Even in a crowd, he was alone. He had his code, his grudges, and his battles to fight. Fire no longer ruled him. Now he would let it guide him to a destiny none could foresee. Sandor Clegane stood at his usual post near the throne room's tall doors when the visitors from the north arrived. He watched them dismount in the outer yard through narrow windows cut into the red keep stone. Stark bannermen bore the direwolf banner of House Stark, and at their head was Eddard Stark himself, the newly named Hand of the King. A lean man with a solemn face, he looked uneasy in the capital's heat. Beside him rode 2 daughters, Sansa and Arya, and the curiosity on their faces was plain. Sandor noted them in passing, though he felt little more than a flicker of interest. The king's business was rarely his concern unless that business demanded the swing of a sword. He remained by the doors, outwardly impassive as the arrivals were ushered into the throne room. King Robert, seated heavily on the Iron Throne, greeted his old friend Ned Stark with booming cheer. The Hound watched the formalities with a mixture of boredom and wariness. The court was more crowded than usual, lords and courtiers jostling for prime vantage. He caught glimpses of the Lannisters standing off to one side, Queen Circe in resplendent green and gold, Prince Joffrey wearing a bored sneer, and Tyrion, the dwarf, watching with a shrewd glint in his mismatched eyes. Ned Stark knelt before Robert, accepted the symbols of office, and rose looking no more comfortable than before. Sandor could see in the man's bearing a quiet honor he rarely found in King's Landing. The city had a way of devouring those who clung to honor, leaving them with only scraps of pride. Stark, though, appeared more iron than some of the so-called knights who preened in the courts. Sandor felt an odd respect stir in him. When the ceremony concluded, the new Hand and his family took quarters within the Red Keep. Rumors spread quickly that Stark's young daughter, Sansa, was meant to wed Prince Joffrey. The news made Sandor's lip curl. He had seen the prince's petty cruelties, his sly arrogance. The thought of any decent soul shackled to that boy offended him, though he kept his opinions to himself. He had no love for princesses or noble ladies, most were illusions draped in silk. Yet there was something childlike and sweet about Sansa Stark, a softness that made him uneasy, as if she were some gentle creature tossed into a pit of vipers. His first direct encounter with her came only days after the Starks' arrival. She was walking in the courtyard alongside her septa, looking at the castle architecture with wide eyes, when she nearly stumbled on loose cobblestones. Sandor, passing by on his way to the practice yard, caught her arm before she could fall. He felt her gasp more than heard it. Her gaze flickered to his face, to the scars that warped one side. She looked frightened, yet she tried to mask it with courtesy. She thanked him in a trembling voice. He released her, grunted an acknowledgement, and continued on his way. Behind him, He imagined he could feel her stare lingering on the ruined flesh. She did not giggle or recoil outright, but he recognized the pity in her eyes as well as the nervousness. By the time he reached the yard, he pushed her from his thoughts and focused on his training. In that practice yard, he sparred with knights who had come to test their mettle against the famed Hound. He dispatched them swiftly, ignoring the stares of bystanders. When he finished, sweat-soaked and grim, Lord Baelish approached with his perpetual smirk. Littlefinger offered veiled compliments on Sandor's skill. "One wonders if you've ever found a foe who can truly match you," Baelish mused. Sandor wiped the sweat from his brow and gave him a cold look. "There's always someone stronger," he answered. "Or bigger." He did not say Gregor's name, but he felt it in his bones. Baelish only chuckled and drifted away. Sandor despised the man's scheming air, his pointed remarks that seemed to pry into a man's thoughts. That evening, a banquet was held in the great hall to honor Ned Stark's taking of the Hand's seat. Long tables groaned under roasted meats, fresh bread, and flagons of wine. Minstrels played, jugglers performed, and the lords and ladies gossiped. Sandor stood guard at the edges, scanning the room. His vantage allowed him to observe the simmering resentments behind painted smiles. The Lannisters in one corner, the Starks in another. King Robert shouted for more ale, Queen Cersei looked ready to snap, and Joffrey flitted about trying to impress anyone who would listen. Sansa Stark sat beside her father, eyes sparkling at the songs the minstrels performed. She seemed untouched by the tension in the air, enthralled with the notion of courtesy and fairy tales. Sandor had to look away. In that moment, her innocence felt like a liability he could not stomach. Days passed and conflict brewed. Ned Stark stepped into his duties, investigating the kingdom's debts, the dealings of the royal council, and rumors of trouble in the Riverlands. Whispers of Gregor Clegane's raids along the Trident surfaced again, stoking Sandor's old hatred. Men said that Gregor, acting under the Lannister banner, had burned villages and slaughtered peasants. Ned Stark declared such crimes monstrous and was rumored to be gathering evidence. Word reached Sandor that the Hand intended to issue a royal decree naming Gregor an outlaw, with orders for his capture or death. He felt an unexpected stirring of admiration for Stark's resolve. Few had the backbone to condemn the Mountain so openly, especially when Tywin Lannister stood behind him. Yet Sandor also knew how dangerous it was to call out the lion's might. One night, after his shift, Sandor found himself lingering outside the Tower of the Hand. He had half a mind to speak with Ned Stark to offer his own testimony about Gregor's cruelty. But as he stood there in the torchlit corridor, he heard muffled voices from inside. He recognized Lord Baelish's smooth cadence and Stark's sharper, more sober replies. They spoke of protecting the realm, of secrets that might topple the crown. Sandor frowned. Whatever was unfolding, it reeked of the sort of intrigue he loathed. He turned away, deciding that if Ned Stark wanted to question him about Gregor, the man would do so directly. He refused to slip into the shadows of the game, doing men's bidding behind curtains. Not long after, tensions crested when an injured traveler brought news of Gregor's latest atrocity. A village near the Ruby Ford had been put to the torch, leaving only corpses. Ned Stark's face was grim as he led a council meeting in the throne room. King Robert was absent, away on a hunt again, leaving the governance to his hand. Queen Cersei looked on with regal disdain. Ned Stark named Gregor Clegane a traitor to the crown and commanded that a group of knights ride forth to bring him to justice. The queen's eyes glittered with anger, yet she had no direct means to stop him. The order was given. Ser Beric Dondarrion was chosen to lead the party. Many in the hall murmured in trepidation. Gregor was a monstrous foe. Sandor stood at his post, silent as ever, though inside he churned with conflicting feelings. For years, he had nursed a desire to see Gregor fall. Now Ned Stark was sending men to do just that. Part of Sandor wanted to volunteer, to face the Mountain and settle the score. But he also knew that stepping forward might place him at odds with the Lannisters, the Queen, and half the court. He was not blind to how precarious his own position could become if he openly assisted Stark. Yet the thought of Gregor walking free set his teeth on edge. In the end, he stayed his hand. Let Beric Dondarrion lead his knights. If they succeeded, well and good. If not, Gregor would remain a blight on the realm. The next day, the small force rode out. Sandor watched them from the ramparts as they passed through the city gates, Ned Stark and his household knights observing them from below. Sansa Stark stood near her father, holding her hands to her chest, praying softly that the gods would protect the gallant knights. Sandor sneered at the notion of gallantry. He knew what Gregor was capable of. Many of those men might not return. The skirmish came and went, and news arrived that Barrack's party had been ambushed. Gregor had overwhelmed them, leaving many dead or scattered. The survivors spoke of the mountain's inhuman might. Ser Barrack was presumed slain, though rumors claimed Thuras of Myr had worked some sorcery to revive him. In King's Landing, Queen Cersei seized on the failure to undermine Ned Stark's authority, pushing King Robert to return and reassert his own rule. Tensions between the crown and the Hand reached a breaking point. Sandor found himself mired in the ugly swirl of blame and rumor. Joffrey boasted that any man who crossed the Lannisters would pay. Sandor kept his thoughts locked behind a grim mask. When Robert returned, he did so in a flurry of anger, roaring at Ned Stark for meddling in Lannister affairs. The wound between the two men, once sealed by old friendship, now gaped. The days turned dark with uncertainty. For Sandor, standing guard at one heated audience after another, it felt like a tinderbox ready to spark. He could see the hatred in Cersei's eyes when she looked at Ned, the contempt in Joffrey's sneer when he watched Sansa's father. Through it all, Sansa drifted with frightened grace, clinging to a fantasy that all would be well if she only showed courtesy. Sandor pitied her naivete. She was but a child among lions. The blow fell when Ned Stark discovered the secret of Queen Cersei's children, the rumor that they were born of incest with her brother Jaime. Sandor heard of it through hush talk among the guards. Ned confronted the queen, urging her to flee before Robert returned. But Robert met a boar's tusk on the hunt and came back dying. Within hours, the palace halls erupted in chaos. Ned tried to declare Stannis Baratheon the rightful heir. Cersei responded by seizing Joffrey's claim to the throne. Goldcloaks turned on Stark's men. Blood was spilled in the throne room. Through it all, Sandor stood his post, uncertain where honor lay in that madness. He saw Stark's knights cut down, heard Sansa's screams echo off the stone as she was taken by the queen's guards. Arya Stark vanished. Ned Stark himself was arrested. In the aftermath, Joffrey claimed the throne, proclaiming himself king. Cersei watched from the shadows, her power coiling behind the boy's crown. The city reeled, and those who had once served Robert now scrambled to appease his heir. Sandor, now in Joffrey's personal guard, found himself at the center of the storm. He had never asked to be the protector of a vicious boy king, but Joffrey seemed to delight in having the Hound at his side. On the day Ned Stark was dragged before the mob to confess, Sandor stood nearby, his face like stone. Sansa knelt weeping, begging for her father's life. Cersei's eyes flicked between father and daughter with feline satisfaction. Joffrey, impatient and cruel, demanded Ned's head anyway. The sound of the executioner's sword falling was lost beneath the roar of the crowd. Sandor tasted bile. There had been no justice in that killing, only a twisted power play. Looking at Sansa's tear-streaked face, he felt a surge of loathing for the boy king who cackled above. Yet Sandor said nothing. He had seen the city devour weaker men. Speaking out would only get him killed. And though he felt some sickened moral pang, he reminded himself that he was no knight. He was the Hound. He served because survival demanded it. Better to bide his time than throw his life away in a futile gesture. In the weeks that followed, war erupted. Robb Stark was declared king in the north. Renly Baratheon claimed the throne as well, and Stannis readied his forces. The realm fractured into the War of the Five Kings. Gregor rampaged in the Riverlands with renewed brutality, acting under Tywin Lannister's command. Meanwhile, Joffrey's cruelty intensified and King's Landing simmered. Starvation threatened as supplies grew scarce, and the Goldcloaks prowled the streets to keep order by force. Sansa was kept in the Red Keep as a hostage to the North's good behavior. Sandor's skill became more needed than ever as Joffrey delighted in petty spectacles of violence. He forced Sansa to watch as he had men flogged or executed, ignoring her pleas for mercy. Sandor stood by, disgust churning in him, but outwardly unmoved. She would glance at him sometimes, as though hoping for protection, but what protection could he offer her against a king's command? He hated seeing her degrade herself, forced to smile and curtsy to the boy who had murdered her father. Yet he also knew that to defy Joffrey openly was suicide. Still, he showed her small courtesies where he could. Once, when Joffrey commanded Sansa be stripped and beaten in the throne room, Sandor positioned himself so the guards faltered, unsure how to proceed with him looming. In the confusion, the queen ordered a milder punishment. Sansa never thanked him, likely never realized what he had done, but Sandor felt a grim satisfaction. He had robbed Joffrey of at least one sadistic pleasure. The seeds of rebellion and rumor spread in the city. Tyrion Lannister arrived as Hound, his cunning mind set on stabilizing King's Landing. He recognized Sandor's value and treated him with a wary respect, perhaps sensing the man's hatred for Gregor or perhaps simply valuing his deadly reputation. Tyrion once approached him in the corridors at night, a single lantern casting their shadows long on the walls. "If it comes to it, would you stand against your brother?" Tyrion asked softly, as though the question were purely theoretical. Sandor stared at him, flicked his gaze to the flame of the lantern, and said, "If he stands against me, I'll cut him down." Tyrion nodded, satisfied. The day Sansa was attacked by the mob in Flea Bottom changed much. She had ridden with Joffrey to view the aftermath of battle outside the city, only to be met with stones and dung hurled by starving peasants. The Gold Cloaks lost control of the situation and the crowd surged. Sansa was separated from the main guard. She might have been dragged off and violated if Sandor had not charged into the throng, cutting down those who reached for her. Fire roared from overturned braziers used by street sellers, but Sandor did not falter. In earlier years, the sight of flames might have frozen him, but he had conquered that fear long ago, hammered it into an iron will. He shielded Sansa with his own body, hacking and snarling like a beast unleashed. By the time he rode free of the mob with her clinging to him, his sword dripped red and the reek of smoke clung to them both. She looked at him with wide, tearful eyes, stammering words of gratitude. He felt an odd tenderness, a protective urge he could scarcely name. He brushed her off with gruffness, warning her to keep quiet and hold on. Yet inside, he was strangely glad she was safe. Later, when Joffrey raged at being chased by the mob, hurling blame in every direction, Sandor kept Sansa's name out of it. The city was a tinderbox, and she was far too soft for its cruelty. As the war escalated, King's Landing prepared for an assault by Stannis Baratheon. Tyrion commanded the city's defenses, forging chains and wildfire, planning to devastate Stannis' fleet in Blackwater Bay. Sandor listened in on these war councils, arms folded, feeling that old flicker of unease at the mention of wildfire. Even he could not dismiss the hazard of that alchemical flame. It burned hotter and brighter than normal fire, near impossible to quench once unleashed. The pyromancers cackled about how they would engulf the bay in green conflagration. But Tyrion seemed the only one both bold and clever enough to wield such a weapon effectively. Joffrey boasted about the victory that would be his, not realizing how easily it might all go wrong. The day of battle arrived and Stannis' ships bore down on the city. Tyrion sprung his trap. Wildfire, hidden in ships along the bay, ignited in a flash of green horror. An entire stretch of water erupted in flame, taking many of Stannis' men with it. But there were more troops landing to the west. The city walls braced for siege. Sandor led a unit of infantry at the mud gate, awaiting the first wave of attackers. The roar of battle was deafening, crashing siege engines, catapults, men screaming in the distance as wildfire consumed them. Smoke blotted the sky. Soon enough, the clash came. Stannis' men scaled the walls, pounding at the gates. Sandor fought with a controlled frenzy, slicing through any who dared approach. Blood spattered his mail, and he hardly felt the cuts he received in return. Behind him, the city burned in places where wildfire spilled. The green flames licked at the walls. In the corners of his vision, the flicker of that unearthly fire tugged at old traumas, but he pressed the fear down. He was no child to be broken. Instead, he used that tension, fighting like a man possessed. His men rallied around him, shouting the Hound's name. They saw him as a beacon of strength in the chaos. Yet even the greatest warrior can be worn down. As the hours dragged on, wave after wave assaulted the gate. Joffrey, cowering behind the safety of the walls, demanded the Hound personally ride out and confront the attackers as if victory were a show to amuse him. Sandor nearly lost his temper. He glared at the Boy King, who flinched beneath that gaze. A silence fell over the men. Then, with an oath, Sandor strode away from Joffrey and mustered the troops for another push. Even a Hound has its limits when teased by a madmaster. Outside the gate, the battle devolved into a street-by-street melee. Stannis' men had managed to land a sizable force, and chaos reigned. Sandor found himself fighting in a haze of sweat, blood, and smoke. The crash of steel, the cries of the wounded, the reek of burning flesh, this was war at its most brutal. He pressed on, rallying those around him, cutting down enemies with furious precision. Twice he glimpsed the hulking shape of someone in full plate, a large man brandishing a great sword, and for a heartbeat he thought it might be Gregor. But it was only another tall warrior. Gregor was off elsewhere, likely pillaging in the Riverlands still. The knowledge both relieved and angered him. He yearned to face his brother, to end their history in a single reckoning. Eventually, the tide turned. A fresh host charged into the fray. Tywin Lannister had arrived, and with him, the forces of Highgarden under Mace Tyrell. Stannis' lines broke. Men fled to their ships or were cut down. King's Landing was saved, though the city lay half-ruined. Joffrey pranced around, claiming victory as if it were his own doing. The lords knelt, praising the new alliance between Lannister and Tyrell. Sandor, exhausted, could scarcely stand. His armor was rent in multiple places, his body bruised. But he remained alive, unbowed by the flames. He had proven himself once more, unstoppable even in the face of wildfire. That night, the city celebrated in a strange mixture of terror and relief. Feasts were thrown for the lords. Corpses littered the streets. The gold cloaks struggled to restore order. Sandor slipped away, preferring solitude over hollow triumph. He walked the battlements, staring out at the starlit sky, the memory of flames still dancing behind his eyes. He recalled the face of young Sansa, the tearful gratitude when he saved her. He recalled Gregor's cruelty, the brand of his childhood. Yet here he stood, alive and undefeated. He felt a stirring in his chest, rage, sorrow, and an odd sense of emptiness. What was left for him now? He could see Sansa pacing on a distant balcony lit by torchlight. She was alone, gazing over the dark city that had devoured her family's hopes. Without quite deciding to, he made his way toward her. He found her leaning over a carved stone railing, tears sparkling on her cheeks. She turned at his approach, startled but not recoiling this time. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, voice trembling, "Why did you save me when the mob came for me? You could have let me die." He let out a soft snort. "I'm no knight, girl, but I'm not so low as to let you be torn apart for that boy's folly." She studied him with those large eyes. "They say you're the fiercest warrior in the city. That you don't fear anything, not even fire." He felt the urge to laugh, a mirthless sound. "I feared fire more than you'll ever know. But I learned not to bow to it." She didn't seem to fully understand, but she nodded, new tears glimmering. "I wish I could be brave," she said softly. He said nothing to that, only stood beside her, the hush of night wrapping them both. In that unspoken moment, an unlikely sympathy stretched between them, a scarred man who had defied the flame and a frightened girl trapped in a viper's nest. He could not offer her rescue from the Lannisters, he was entangled in their grasp himself. But he could offer her a truth, that fear was a chain that only one's own will could break. When at last she retreated to her chambers, he remained, the distant flicker of dying fires on the horizon reflecting in his dark eyes. In the weeks that followed, the court turned its focus to new alliances. Marjorie Tyrell arrived, wedded Joffrey in Sansa's stead, and the North was left to burn under the ravages of war. Sansa remained a hostage of use only so long as the Lannisters wished to manipulate the North. Sandor continued to serve in the personal guard, though his patience with Joffrey's malice wore thin. He had proven his worth in battle beyond question. Some whispered that he was as mighty as the mountain himself and more cunning. The name Hound had grown teeth indeed. Yet rumors reached him that Gregor roamed the Westerlands unchallenged, pillaging at Tywin's behest. Every atrocity that filtered back stirred Sandor's old anger. Finally, a chance presented itself when Tywin called for additional troops to bolster his forces. King Joffrey, bored with city life, commanded a contingent to ride west. Sandor was ordered to accompany them, to serve as a show of royal might. They would join with Lord Tywin's army near Harrenhal before marching to confront Robb Stark. The prospect of crossing paths with Gregor felt inevitable. Before he left, he caught sight of Sansa once more. She was walking in the gardens, escorted by a pair of guards. A breeze stirred her auburn hair. He observed her from a distance, thinking of that night on the balcony. For a moment, he considered approaching her, perhaps offering some parting words. But what could he say? He turned away without a sound, mounting his horse as the royal column formed. The city gates opened wide, and Sandor rode out at its head, black cloak snapping behind him. The journey west was arduous, the roads clogged with refugees fleeing war. Villages lay deserted or razed, fields burned, livestock slaughtered. The stench of death clung to the air. At Harrenhal, they found Tywin Lannister ensconced behind the blackened walls of that cursed castle. Gregor Clegane was there too, the mountain looming tall among Tywin's knights. Sandor saw him across the courtyard on the day of their arrival. For an instant, time warped back to that childhood brazier, the searing agony that defined his life. The old hatred roared within him like a caged beast. Gregor turned, and their eyes met. The big man's face was hidden behind a fearsome helm shaped like a snarling skull, but Sandor knew that monstrous glare. They did not speak. Tywin called a war council, and all the prominent knights filed in. Sandor stood near the perimeter, arms folded, ignoring the watchful gaze of Gregor from across the torchlit chamber. Tywin laid out the plan. They would lure Robb Stark into the open by threatening Riverrun and the surrounding lands, forcing a pitched battle. Gregor would lead a vanguard, harrying any outriders. Sandor was assigned to command a second detachment, guarding the main supply lines. Pride wrestled with frustration. Tywin had placed him in a protective role, away from the savage glory of the vanguard. Was it caution, or was Tywin testing him? In the days that followed, Sandor observed Gregor's men preparing for another round of pillaging. The Mountain made jests of it, speaking in harsh grunts and brutal laughter. His men revered him out of fear, relating stories of his cruelty. More than once, Sandor clenched his fists at the callous way they spoke of the smallfolk. He remembered the boy he had been, powerless under Gregor's assault, and the vow he'd made to never again yield to that monstrous might. Eventually, Tywin gave the order to march. The columns snaked through the riverlands, torching farmsteads as they went. Sandor's supply guard kept pace behind the vanguard. Smoke hung on the horizon wherever Gregor passed. At night, Sandor patrolled the camps, hearing sobs from displaced families, seeing the fear in the eyes of those who cowered. More than once, he intervened when Gregor's men tried to abuse captives. A savage glare from the Hound, and many of them backed down. But the tension mounted. Gregor's men whispered that Sandor was going soft, that he had no stomach for real war. Sandor answered them with his fists if they pressed too far. He was no gentle knight, but neither would he stand by while innocents were brutalized for sport. At last, word came that Robb Stark's army was on the move. Tywin planned to strike near a stretch of rolling hills by the Red Fork. On the day of the engagement, the sky was iron-gray, clouds threatening rain. Troops gathered in tight formations. Banners snapped in the wind, Lannister crimson, as well as the black dogs of House Clegane. Sandor rode with his detachment, scanning the terrain. A mile ahead, he saw Gregor's vanguard moving into position. The Mountain's gray helm towered over the lesser knights. Across the field, the direwolf banners of the north emerged, ranks of spearmen and cavalry fanning out. The horns sounded. The army surged forward. Sandor felt the familiar thrumming in his veins, that mix of dread and exhilaration that came with battle. He led his men, sword raised, hearing the thunder of hooves and the clash of steel. The first impact was brutal. Men screamed as they fell. Horses collided with pikes. Sandor's blades swept a path through the chaos. He was aware of the North's fierce resistance, the howls of their wolves, and the tang of blood on the wind. Rain began to fall, turning the ground slick. Somewhere to his left, Gregor's war cry boomed, a deep roar that cut through the din. Sandor glimpsed him hacking down a cluster of men, unstoppable as a juggernaut. The northern lines wavered. But then, from the hills, a reserve of Stark cavalry crashed into Gregor's flank. In the swirling melee, Sandor lost sight of his brother. He pressed on, ensuring the supply lines held, repelling the stray outriders who tried to break through. When the worst of the chaos subsided, Lannister forces stood victorious. The North had withdrawn in good order, but left many dead behind. In the muddy aftermath, Sandor dismounted, scanning the field for survivors. He saw a swirl of disarray near a small copse of trees. Gregor was there, breathing heavily, helm dented, sword dripping. He had cornered a wounded northern knight who knelt in the mud. The knight's visor was up, revealing a youth no older than 15, tears mingling with blood. Gregor raised his sword for a killing blow. Something in Sandor snapped. He advanced, calling out enough. Gregor turned, startled by the challenge. "Since when do you bark orders at me?" the Mountain snarled. The boy tried to crawl away. Gregor grabbed him by the scruff, intending to finish it. Sandor's hand shot out, seized Gregor's wrist. The bigger man glowered, disbelieving. On any other day, he might have thrown Sandor aside. But Sandor had braced himself. The memory of that brazier, the old burn, the childhood torment, everything coalesced into a single defiant moment. He locked eyes with Gregor. "I said enough," he growled. Gregor jerked free and shoved Sandor so hard he nearly fell. "You dare?" the Mountain roared. Laughter rippled among Gregor's men, but it was uneasy. Sandor regained his footing, unflinching. "Fight a real foe if you want blood," he said, drawing his sword. Gregor's surprise twisted into fury. "You ungrateful whelp," he spat, hefting his great sword. "I should have finished you years ago." The air thickened with tension. Sandor's men tensed, some stepping back. They knew better than to come between the brothers. Lightning flickered across the dark sky as the rain intensified. Beneath the patter of water on steel, time seemed to slow. For Sandor, it felt like the culminating moment of a lifetime's torment. He remembered the day Gregor forced his face into the brazier, the nights of fear, the vow he had made at the forge. Now he would test the metal of that vow. Gregor struck first, a savage downward blow that Sandor sidestepped at the last possible instant. Mud splashed around them. Sandor countered, striking low at Gregor's knees, but the bigger man parried with impossible strength, forcing Sandor's blade aside. They circled in the mud, thunder rolling overhead. Gregor hammered forward with a barrage of strikes that would cave in lesser men's guards. But Sandor met each blow, using cunning footwork and angled blocks to deflect that brute power. Sparks flew each time their blades connected. More than once, Gregor's sword came close enough to slice leather straps on Sandor's armor, but Sandor refused to yield ground. Lightning forked again, illuminating the swirling rain in stark white. Gregor roared and swung for Sandor's head. Sandor ducked, feeling the wind of that monstrous blow, and seized the moment to drive his shoulder into Gregor's side. It was like hitting a stone wall, but Gregor staggered a step. Sandor slashed upward, cutting across Gregor's breastplate. The metal screeched, leaving a dark gouge. The mountain grunted, more enraged than hurt. He bashed Sandor with his gauntlet, knocking him backward into the mud. The air burst from Sandor's lungs. Gregor raised his sword to finish it, eyes burning with hateful triumph. Time seemed to crawl. Sandor rolled aside at the last instant, the heavy blade biting into the ground. Mud splattered. Sandor lurched to his feet, ignoring the aching in his ribs, and slashed across Gregor's forearm. Gregor howled, dropping his sword for a heartbeat. The watchers gasped. In that space, Sandor kicked the huge man's weapon away, leaving him armed only with his fists. Gregor lunged with a wild swing, catching Sandor's jaw. Stars danced in his vision. He could taste blood, but he had forced Gregor into close combat. The mountain might be massive, but Sandor had agility and the savage determination born from years of rage. They grappled in the mud, boots slipping. Gregor tried to crush Sandor's neck between his hands, but Sandor twisted free, driving an elbow into Gregor's broken arm. The bigger man roared in agony. Sandor drew a dagger from his belt and plunged it into the gap in Gregor's armor at the side of his torso. Gregor stiffened, eyes wide. Blood streamed. With a final snarl, Gregor mustered his waning strength and slammed Sandor to the ground. Sandor's head struck a rock. Blackness threatened to envelop him, but he clung to consciousness, seeing Gregor above him, wounded, bleeding, murder in his gaze. Sandor tightened his grip on the dagger, wrenched it free, and drove it up under Gregor's breastplate, beneath his ribs. The blade found a gap. Gregor's eyes bulged. He coughed, spitting blood, and collapsed heavily on top of Sandor. For a moment, Sandor could not breathe, pinned under the mountain's bulk. He heard distant shouts, the pounding of rain. Then rough hands hauled Gregor's corpse away. The watchers, stunned, murmured in disbelief. The mountain that rides, the terror of the riverlands, lay dead in the mud, felled by the Hound. Sandor's chest heaved. Pain racked his body, but a fierce, trembling triumph coursed through him. He rolled over, spitting blood, and looked upon the lifeless face of his brother. The man who had haunted his every nightmare, who had given him the scars that shaped his life, was gone. The hush that fell over the battlefield was deafening. Men from both sides stared, as though they had just witnessed a story from the old songs. Sandor struggled to his feet, chest burning. Gregor's men recoiled, uncertain whether to avenge their fallen lord or flee. Tywin's bannermen appeared, aghast. Across the field, Lannister banners rippled in the storm wind. Sandor pointed his bloody dagger at Gregor's men. "Anyone who follows him in cruelty dies the same," he rasped. None challenged him. One by one they backed away, eyes wide. Thunder rumbled overhead. A sense of finality coursed through Sandor. He had ended Gregor's shadow at last. Yet with that victory came the realization that he had struck down a sworn knight of House Lannister, that Tywin himself might brand Sandor a traitor. Perhaps it did not matter. He had spent too long chained to the Lannister's service. The taste of freedom, tinged with blood, stirred within him. A horn sounded in the distance, signaling the end of the day's skirmish. Soldiers converged to tend the wounded, to strip the dead. Sandor stumbled from the scene, ignoring the stairs. He found his horse tethered near a burnt oak, splattered with mud like everything else. Mounting with difficulty, he turned his gaze westward. Lightning illuminated the horizon. He thought of everything that had kept him in King's Landing, The position, the renown, the grudging duty. All of it seemed worthless now. He had done what he set out to do long ago. Best his brother and break free from the fear that had once ruled him. He rode away from the battlefield before Tywin could summon him. If he was to be named an outlaw, so be it. The realm's greatest warrior, they had called him, shaped by fire and unbroken by fear. Now he would decide his own fate. Mud splashed under the hooves of his horse, the rain washing away the blood. In his mind, he carried the image of Sansa Stark's frightened eyes, the knowledge that men like Joffrey still tormented the realm, that the war raged on. Perhaps he would find a path that allowed him to fight for something other than a cruel master's whim. Or perhaps the quiet of some distant land would welcome him. He did not know, but the road stretched long ahead, and he intended to follow it. As thunder rolled over the riverlands, Sandor Clegane rode into the storm. He had left behind the nightmares of his past, conquered the inferno that once burned him. In time, the bards might sing of the fearsome hound who cast down the mountain, of the scarred man who overcame the flames and strode into legend. But Sandor cared little for songs. He wanted only to live on his own terms, free of the shadow that had dogged him all his life. If the realm still needed the greatest warrior forged by fire, he would be there, sword in hand, unafraid, unbroken, and unleashed at last. You said, continue 6,500 words, ensure lore accuracy and attention to detail when reading previous chapter, no subtitles. ChatGPT said, reasoned for 12 seconds. Rain slicked Sandor's cloak as he rode away from the battlefield, the acrid smell of blood and soot lingering on his clothes. He did not look back at Gregor's corpse sprawled in the churned mud, nor at the men who gawked in shock. The thunder of his horses' hooves pounded a steady rhythm in his ears, matching the thud of his own heart. Each step carried him further from the Lannisters, from the sight of Tywin's banners, from the monstrous shadow his brother had cast since childhood. Ahead lay a darkened horizon flecked with distant lightning. He rode for hours, letting the tempest wash away the blood on his armor and the mud that clung to his boots. Now and again, the pain of his injuries forced him to slow. He felt the cracked ribs where Gregor's gauntlet had struck, the cut on his jaw where the mountain's fist had opened skin. But these aches were a paltry price for the finality he had claimed. Gregor was dead at his hand. The brazier and the flame that had haunted his nightmares were avenged. That knowledge soothed him more than any poultice could. Before dawn, the storm ebbed to a faint drizzle, and he found himself on a narrow track winding between wooded hills. He needed rest, but not in any place Lannister outriders might search. Given time, word would spread that the Hound had killed the mountain. Tywin Lannister would not suffer such a blow without a response. He imagined the old lion's cold fury, the orders to hunt him down, bring him back in chains. Sandor had no illusions about how the realm worked. A man who slew a favored Lannister bannerman, brother or not, became a marked target. Eventually, he came upon a deserted shepherd's hut tucked into a slope, half-collapsed from neglect. Good enough, he decided. He tethered his horse beneath a crooked lean-to, then ducked inside. The thatch roof leaked, letting rivulets of water run down the walls, but it offered shelter. He dropped to a seat on a broken stool and probed his ribs, wincing. The memory of the fight with Gregor flared in his mind. He felt neither joy nor regret, only a fierce, weary relief. For years, he had carried that hatred. Now he wondered if the hatred would fade like a wound that had run its course, or if the emptiness it left behind might swallow him. He slept fitfully, waking to the gray light of morning and the sting of stiff muscles. Cautiously, he slipped outside. A fine mist clung to the air, beating on his scarred cheek. The horse nickered softly. Sandor patted its flank, then rummaged in his saddlebag for a meager ration of dried meat. He ate in silence, listening to the world around him, the distant caw of crows, the soft rustle of branches in the fading drizzle. It was almost peaceful. Strange after the constant screams and clamor of war. He set out again, guiding his mount away from the main roads. He had no destination in mind, only a vague notion of heading south or east, anywhere but west where Tywin's army remained. Perhaps he would reach the Trident, cross into the Crownlands. The idea of returning to King's Landing turned his stomach, but the city might be the only place large enough to lose himself in. Then again, he thought of Sansa Stark imprisoned by the Lannisters, forced to smile for that vicious boy king. The memory of her terrified eyes tugged at him. He had once vowed to himself he was no sworn shield, yet he hated the notion of leaving her to that fate. She was a child in a den of lions, her family destroyed. The war-torn riverlands offered little respite. Every few leagues he saw the signs of recent pillage, a burned barn, a gutted farmhouse, livestock roaming unattended. Here and there, corpses lay stiff in the road. Small folk fled with their belongings in wagons or on their backs, no longer caring which army had done the damage. Whenever Sandor drew near, they shrank away from him, alarmed by the black cloak and battered armor. He supposed he must look a grim sight, blood-smeared, sword at his hip, tall as a shadow in the gloom. He did not begrudge their fear. Better they keep their distance than invite more tragedy. By midday, he came upon a shallow stream running swift with the rains run off. He dismounted to let the horse drink, cupping cold water in his hands to wash the dried blood from his neck. As he did, he noticed movement among the rocks on the far bank. A trio of ragged figures lurked, each holding a spear or club. Outlaws, no doubt, or desperate refugees. They eyed him warily, uncertain whether to show themselves or flee. Sandor met their gaze. His first instinct was to place a hand on his sword, but a second glance told him these men were half-starved, clothes torn, eyes hollow with hunger. They posed little threat unless cornered. He straightened. "I've no quarrel with you," he called, his voice carrying across the water. One man, older, with a patchy beard, lifted his club a fraction. "We seen knights kill families for less," he said bitterly. Sandor snorted. "I'm no knight." They exchanged uncertain looks, then slowly backed away into the brush. Sandor stood there until their shapes vanished. He felt a pang of recognition. In another life, he too might have been a cornered beast, fending off the predators of war. But he had always been on the side that wielded steel and authority. Now that authority was gone, replaced by an outlaw's brand, he wondered if that difference truly mattered. Perhaps it never had. He pressed on, passing farmland turned to ash. The day stretched long, the roads largely empty. Late in the afternoon, he spied a small village by the curve of a larger river. Smoke rose from chimneys. This one, it seemed, had not yet been ravaged. He thought of seeking a maester or a hedge doctor to treat his ribs, but caution prevailed. News of a scarred warrior might spread, and soon Lannister men would come knocking. He skirted around the village, content to remain unseen. Dusk found him riding along a narrow track overshadowed by tall oaks, their leaves dripping from the recent rain. A lantern's glow flickered ahead, revealing a roadside inn. He paused, debating. A bed and a hot meal would mend him better than another night in the open. But an inn meant potential questions, a chance someone might recognize him. He weighed the risk. The armor he wore still bore the sigil of House Clegane, 3 black dogs on a yellow field. Stripped or not, he was distinctive. Few men in Westeros had a face burned like his. Then again, the darkness might hide him. If he kept his interactions brief, it could be safe enough. With a tired grunt, he nudged his horse forward. The throbbing in his side told him he could use a bit of rest out of the cold. The inn was Maud Est, a half-timbered building with a stable off to one side. A weathered sign swung above the door, though the letters had faded too much to read. He guided his horse to the stable yard and called for the stable boy. A thin lad emerged, gawking at the battered armor and the scars. Sandor tossed him a copper. "See him fed and rubbed down," he muttered, then ducked inside. The common room was lit by a few smoky torches and a central hearth. A handful of tired travelers sat at rough-hewn tables, spooning stew from bowls. The innkeep, a stout woman with streaks of gray in her hair, glanced up without much interest. "Coin first," she said. Sandor set a silver stag on the bar. She bit it, nodded, and handed him a key. "Upstairs, 3rd door on the left." He kept his hood drawn, settling at an empty table near the corner. The woman brought a bowl of thin rabbit stew and a hunk of dark bread. It tasted of salt and pepper with lumps of carrot. Good enough. He ate methodically, noticing how the other patrons eyed him from a distance, their murmured conversation never quite above a hush. The meager light cast shadows across his disfigured face whenever he lifted his hood to take a spoonful. Let them whisper, he thought. It hardly mattered now. When he finished, he rose, ignoring the prying looks, and climbed the stairs. The room was small, cramped with a single pallet and a wobbly table. But it had a shuttered window and a door that locked. He slid the bolt, then pried off his wet cloak, letting it hang across a chair. His armor came next, piece by piece. The gashes on his breastplate reminded him of how close he had come to dying under Gregor's blade. Setting it aside, he took stock of his injuries. Bruises marred his ribs, purple and yellow, though none seemed broken beyond what he could bear. The cut on his jaw had clotted, leaving dried blood crusted on his stubble. He found a wash basin of stale water and cleaned himself as best he could. Then, with a groan, he lay on the pallet, dagger near at hand. Despite the ache in his body, sleep claimed him swiftly. He dreamed of the brazier again, but this time the flames did not devour him. Instead, he saw Gregor's face twisting in rage as Sandor drove the dagger home. A swirl of greenish wildfire lurked at the edges of his vision. He jerked awake with a gasp, hand clenched on the dagger's hilt. The room was still, the night silent. He forced himself to breathe, reminding himself Gregor was gone. The nightmares might remain, but the source of them was ashes in the mud. Morning brought a thin fog and the smell of damp earth. Sandor slipped out of the inn at first light, avoiding the curious glances of the stable boy. He paid for the horse's keep with another coin and rode on. By noon, he reached a crossroads marked by a dilapidated sign pointing east to King's Landing, west to River Run, and north to the Twins. War ravaged every corner of the map, it seemed. The Starks and Lannisters tore at each other's throats. The Tyrells and Baratheons jockeyed for advantage. The Ironborn had struck along the coastline, and Dorne watched with patient eyes. Sandor could go anywhere or nowhere. Perhaps he ought to vanish south to Old Town, or cross the sea to Essos. The thought of the open steppe or the free cities beckoned. Yet a lingering pull drew him toward King's Landing, the place he had once guarded, the place where Sansa Stark remained a hostage to a sadistic boy. He rode east. If Tywin's men were searching for him, they might well expect him to flee anywhere but the capital. The swirl of wars might cloak his arrival. And if Joffrey recognized him, well, Sandor no longer feared the king's wrath. He had seen how easily he could take a life when pushed. At least in King's Landing, he might find a way to see if Sansa was alive or if she needed rescuing, though the notion of rescuing a highborn lady hardly fit the life he knew. Still, he could not shake the memory of how she clung to him when the mob raged, or the night on the balcony when she had whispered her wish for courage. The roads grew more traveled as he neared the Crownlands. He encountered soldiers wearing the red cloaks of the Lannisters or the gold cloaks of the City Watch in small patrols. Each time, he detoured around fields or slipped into wooded copse. Once, he was nearly spotted by a pair of mounted Lannister scouts. He crouched behind a hedge until they passed, hearts pounding. The knowledge of what would happen if they recognized him left him grim. He had spilled too much Lannister blood already, and they would demand his head. After a week's journey, King's Landing came into view. A sprawl of walls and towers perched above the Blackwater Rush. The memory of the great battle of the Blackwater flickered in his mind, green wildfire devouring Stannis' fleet. He recalled the screams and the choking smoke. It seemed a lifetime ago. Now the city's gates bustled with merchants, refugees, whores, sellswords, an endless tide. War had done little to stem the flow of humanity around the capital. He dismounted beyond the ridgeline and stashed his horse in a half-hidden grove, tethering it to a sturdy branch. It might survive on grass until he returned, or he might never return. He had no illusions that this foray was risk-free. Dressed in a simple tunic and cloak, with his sword slung at his hip, he made his way on foot toward the city, head bowed to conceal his burns. In the crowd, a tall man could still stand out, but there were enough travelers that he did not draw immediate attention. Within the city walls, the stench assaulted him anew. Stale sweat, rotting food, waste, the press of too many bodies. He moved through the outer wards, ignoring the leering cutpurses and the desperate urchins. Here and there, he spotted groups of gold cloaks patrolling, wearily scanning for trouble. Occasionally, he heard talk of how the war fared. Rumors that Robb Stark was unstoppable in the field, that Tywin Lannister now camped at Harrenhal or the Westerlands, that the Tyrells held the city in a velvet glove. The name, the Hound, cropped up in hushed whispers, usually in reference to Joffrey's personal bodyguard or the savage who had once protected Sansa Stark. None seemed to know he had vanished west and killed his brother. He slipped through twisting alleys until he reached the hill of the Red Keep. The fortress loomed high, its walls bright in the midday sun. Gaining entrance would be no small feat. The gates were guarded by vigilant men, many of whom might recognize him. Yet he was not wholly without resources. He circled to a lesser gate near the stables, recalling from memory the guard rotations and hidden corners. In the old days, he had passed through these gates 100 times, scowling at lesser guards who feared his wrath. He waited until the shift changed. Then, pulling the hood low over his face, he approached with a limp as though he were a stable hand or messenger. The guards board gave him a cursory glance. One frowned at his height, but Sandor murmured something about new orders from the gold cloaks. The mention of authority and the casual confidence in his tone made them hesitate. Then a distant call distracted them and Sandor slipped inside. The castle corridors felt both familiar and foreign. Torches lined the walls and servants scuttled about in a hurry. He kept to the back passages, mindful of watchers. More than once, he pressed himself into an alcove to avoid a patrol or a passing courtier. His sense of direction guided him toward the wing where Sansa's quarters had once been. If she was still in the Red Keep, she might remain in those same lavishly decorated cells that served as her prison. He did not know what he intended to do if he found her. Perhaps he merely wanted to be sure she was alive, that Joffrey's cruelty had not snuffed out that soft, gentle spirit. He reached a gallery overlooking a small courtyard. There, he glimpsed someone in a pale gown walking alongside a maid. Auburn hair caught the sunlight, Sansa Stark. She looked thinner than he remembered, her face drawn. Even at a distance, he could sense the quiet sorrow in her posture, the way she clasped her hands as if to stop them trembling. He felt an unexpected wash of relief. She lived. He let out a silent breath and watched as she crossed the courtyard toward the Royal September. Her maid kept a respectful distance, carrying a prayer book. Sansa's lips moved, perhaps in a low hymn or reflection. The sight brought a pang to Sandor's chest. She was praying for deliverance that never came, locked in a cage of silk and fear. He knew following her openly would be too risky, so he made a circuitous path through the corridors, hoping to intercept her route. Slipping into a colonnade, he crouched behind a pillar as the courtyard doors opened. Her footsteps echoed in the hall. She paused, glancing back at the maid. "I'll only be a moment," she said softly. "I left my handkerchief." The maid hesitated. "Shall I fetch it, my lady?" Sansa shook her head. "No, please you go ahead. I'll join you soon." The maid bobbed a curtsy and disappeared around a corner. Sansa stood alone, gaze distant, her expression haunted. Sandor stepped forward, the leather of his boots whispering on the stone. She tensed, turning. Her eyes widened when she saw his towering figure. At first, terror flashed in her face, as if expecting some court knight come to torment her. Then her gaze settled on his scars, the burnt flesh that half hid beneath the hood. Recognition dawned. She let out a tiny gasp, pressed her hand to her mouth. You were gone," she whispered. "They said you'd run. Some said you died. Others said you betrayed the crown." He shrugged. "I've heard worse." The sound of his own voice, low and gruff, felt strange after so many days of silence. He scanned the hallway, ensuring no one else was near. "I came to see." He stopped, not entirely sure how to finish. See if she was alive? See if she still had hope? She glanced around, heart pounding, her cheeks pale. "It isn't safe for you here," she said in a rush. "Joffrey has set watchers for traitors and the queen." "I'm no traitor," he growled softly, "but I won't waste time arguing with them. I only needed to know you were—" He trailed off again, frustration knotting his gut. He could face Gregor's blade without a tremor, yet words to a frightened girl eluded him. She swallowed. "I'm all right," she said, though her trembling voice belied it. "Marjorie Tyrell is queen now, so Joffrey isn't quite as cruel as before. But I'm still a prisoner. They watch me. I can't leave. If I try—" Her voice caught. "They say my brother is at war, but my mother is captive somewhere, and Winterfell has been burned." Sandor pressed his lips into a thin line. He had heard conflicting rumors about Winterfell's fall, the Boltons, Theon Greyjoy. None of it boded well. "I can't stay," he said finally, "but I could take you from this place if you wished." The words surprised even him. What was he doing, offering rescue to a highborn lady? Yet the moment he spoke, he realized he meant it. He hated the thought of her locked here, forced to endure Joffrey's sadism. He might not be a gallant knight, but he knew how to slip out of the city, how to fight if cornered. He had no illusions that the road would be kind to her, but it might be kinder than the Red Keep. Her eyes widened with a swirl of hope and fear. Leave? But how? She glanced around again. Joffrey will kill you if you're found here. And my guards. I can handle your guards, he said. But you must decide now. The longer I linger, the greater the risk we're both discovered. And if you come without finery, without a retinue. It'll be you, me, and the open road. She hesitated, tears welling. I'm frightened, she confessed in a trembling voice. I've dreamed of escape, but where would we go? The roads are full of soldiers and bandits. Robbers, he might be dead by now for all I know. My mother, my sister. I don't even know if they live. He could almost feel the weight of her indecision pressing on the air. Part of him wanted to scoff, to tell her that freedom was worth any risk. But another part remembered that she was a girl raised on songs of chivalry, untrained in hardship. I'm no hero from your tales, he said softly. If we leave, you'll see the worst of war up close. You'll freeze in the rain, go hungry if the coin runs out. You might regret it. She blinked away tears. I regret staying here every day, she whispered, voice raw. A moment passed and he saw the flicker of determination in her gaze. All my life, I wanted to be a good and proper lady, to please everyone. And it got me this. I can't pretend anymore. Her words wavered, but she set her shoulders. I'll come with you. He inclined his head, hiding the small surge of respect he felt. Then we go now before your maid returns. He offered his hand. She hesitated only a moment before placing hers in his. His palm dwarfed hers, the scars meeting delicate skin. He led her down a side corridor, moving swiftly but quietly. She clutched her skirts to keep up, glancing behind them as though expecting to see guards appear at any moment. They navigated the winding passages. Twice he heard footsteps and pressed her against the wall in a shadowed alcove, heart-pounding. Each time, the guards passed by without noticing. At last, they reached the lesser gate that opened onto the stables. He peered through a crack. 2 gold cloaks stood outside, looking bored. No easy way to slip by. He felt Sansa's breath hitch beside him. Glancing around, he spotted a side passage that led into the stables themselves. He guided her that way, stepping into the dim interior. The smell of hay and horse sweat enveloped them. A stable hand snoozed on a stool, oblivious. Quietly, Sandor found a meek-looking mare with a simple saddle. Sansa stroked the animal's nose, her nerves visible in every gesture. He collected a bridle, noticing her fine dress stood out even in the gloom. Take that cloak, he muttered, pointing to an old stable blanket. She wrapped it around her shoulders, hiding the silken gown. They led the horse to the far end of the stable where a small door opened onto a side alley. Sandor tested it. Locked. He grimaced. No time to search for a key. He drew his dagger and forced the simple latch with a grunt. It gave way with a splintering sound. Beyond lay an alley thick with refuse and puddles of stagnant water. The smell made Sansa wrinkle her nose, but she said nothing. He helped her mount, then glanced around. With her hood drawn and cloak hiding her features, she might pass for a servant or traveling woman if no one looked too close. The city streets were crowded even at midday. Sandor walked beside the mare, keeping his hood low, murmuring for Sansa to keep her head down. They threaded through the throng, past carts of vegetables, street urchins crying for coin, and the occasional gold cloak on patrol. Several times Sansa's eyes darted about in panic, but Sandor's presence and his intimidating scowl dissuaded too much scrutiny. At last, they reached the gates. Here was the real test, getting beyond the city walls. A squad of watchmen stood at the portcullis, checking travelers. Sandor paused at the edge of the crowd, scanning for weaknesses. The watchmen seemed to be letting most leave without issue. They only questioned folks who looked suspicious or had large wagons of goods. He placed a hand on Sansa's leg. Calm, he murmured. We walk through like we have every right to be here. She nodded, swallowing her fear. They joined a small group of travelers heading out, a peddler with a donkey, a pair of farmers, and a minstrel with a harp. The watch glanced at them, bored. One guard squinted. What's under the hood? He asked, peering at Sansa. She lowered her gaze, saying nothing. Sandor fixed the guard with a cold stare. She's ill, lost her voice, he said in a gravelly mutter. We're bound for Rosby to see her kin. The guard sniffed the air as though suspicious. Sandor's hand hovered near his sword. But after a tense moment, the guard shrugged and waved them on. They passed beneath the portcullis. The daylight beyond felt like a benediction, the open road beckoning. Neither spoke until the walls of King's Landing shrank behind them. When at last they reached a bend in the road and the city vanished from view, Sansa exhaled a trembling breath, eyes shining with relief and disbelief all at once. They pressed on until late afternoon, keeping to a well-trodden path that forked east and north. Eventually, Sandor guided her off the main route, recalling how easily the gold cloaks might chase them down if they stayed on a common road. They found a small wooded glen where a stream ran clear, and he helped her dismount. Her legs wobbled from tension and unaccustomed riding. He offered a hand to steady her. Silence stretched as they took stock of where they were. Birdsong mingled with the rush of water. Sansa gazed at the trees with eyes that seemed almost too large for her face. She rubbed her temples. "It doesn't feel real," she admitted softly. "I've wanted to leave that place for so long, but I never dared. I thought no one would help me." Sandor looked away, shrugging one shoulder. He was no knight to claim altruism. Yet a small part of him felt strangely gratified by her gratitude. "You still might regret it," he warned. "The war's not done, and out here, you'll face men as bad as Joffrey. Some could be worse. We'll need coin, supplies, a plan." She nodded, determination flickering beneath her apprehension. "I have a little coin sewn into my hem. My mother taught me to hide silver that way. And I'll learn." Her voice wavered but did not break. "I won't be useless." He regarded her for a moment. The timid girl he had known seemed to be shedding her skin, revealing a slender, uncertain courage. Perhaps she would endure after all. He knelt by the stream to drink, feeling the chill water soothe his throat. Then he stood. "We can't linger. When the queen learns you've gone, they'll send men after us. Best we keep moving." They mounted again, turning northeast, away from the main roads. The setting sun gilded the horizon with a soft glow. Each hoofbeat carried them further from the Red Keep's clutches, deeper into the chaos of a war-torn realm. Sansa asked quietly, "Where will we go?" Sandor considered. "We could aim for Riverrun if it still holds under the Tullis. Or try the Vale of Arryn, your mother's sister's land. But the Vale is closed to outsiders, last I heard. Might be we find Robb Stark's host if it's still in the field." At the mention of her brother, Sansa's face brightened with hope. "If Robb is alive, he'll protect us. He'd never abandon me." Sandor said nothing to that, thinking of how war spared no illusions. But for her sake, he kept the cynicism from his tongue. They rode on as night fell. Sansa dozed in the saddle, exhausted by fear and adrenaline. Sandor stayed alert, scanning the darkening forest. Old instincts told him they would not be safe until many more leagues separated them from King's Landing. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned beneath his stoic facade, relief at having done something worthy, uncertainty about how to manage a highborn girl in the wild, and the persistent ache of old wounds. He had broken from the Lannisters, from a life of violence on their leash. He had killed his brother and shaken off the fear of fire that once bound him. Now he found himself forging a new path with Sansa Stark by his side, a girl who once looked at nights with starry eyes. At a small clearing beneath tall oaks, they finally stopped to make camp. The moon was a silver crescent, clue. DS drifting across its face. Sandor gathered kindling with practiced efficiency. Though the flicker of flame once haunted him, he had long since claimed it as an ally. With flint and steel, he coaxed a small fire into life. Sansa watched him, silent. When the flames caught, she shifted, as though recalling the stories of his burns. He noticed her expression. "I can endure a campfire well enough," he muttered, settling by the heat. "Took me years to master that." She hesitated, then lowered herself onto a fallen log. "Thank you," she said softly. He shrugged, but she pressed on. "I know, you risked yourself coming back. You owe me nothing. Yet you did it anyway." She blinked as if unsure how to phrase her gratitude. Sandor gazed into the fire. The orange glow danced in his dark eyes. After a moment he spoke, voice rough. "I once thought I owed your family nothing. I served the Lannisters because it was all I knew. But I have no fondness for butchers or liars. And maybe I couldn't stomach leaving you there, knowing what might happen." He grunted, uncomfortable with the confession. "Don't make more of it than there is." She nodded, a ghost of a smile tugging at her lips. "Then I'll be content with what it is, my lord." Her use of the title sounded almost teasing, though her tone was gentle. He let it pass without snapping. In the hush of the night, they ate simple fare of bread and cheese, what they had scavenged. Afterward, Sansa curled up beneath the cloak for warmth, trembling in the cool air. Sandor sat watch, sword across his lap, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Occasionally, he glanced at Sansa's sleeping form, her face softened by slumber. She looked vulnerable, childlike. He felt a surge of protectiveness. tempered by the knowledge that he was no true safeguard against the world's horrors, merely a scarred man forging his own uncertain path. When morning came, they set out again. Each day became a test of caution. They avoided villages where Lannister or Gold Cloak patrols might pass, surviving on what meager supplies they could purchase from suspicious smallfolk. Sansa, lacking her highborn attire, appeared as a simple traveler, though her bearing sometimes betrayed her gentle upbringing. Sandor taught her how to maintain a horse's tack, how to keep her hood low when strangers rode by, how to shape her voice into something gruffer if questioned. More than once, she stumbled, tears of frustration threatening, but she never asked to turn back. Pride or desperation, perhaps both, kept her moving forward. Soon enough, they learned from talkative wayfarers that Robb Stark's fortunes had turned grim. The Northern King was rumored to have suffered defeats. The phrase betrayed him at the Twins, if the rumors were true. The bloodshed that followed was too awful to recount. Sansa's cheeks drained of color when she heard mention of the Red Wedding. No one could confirm if her mother or brother had survived. The news crushed her hope, leaving her in silent shock for days. Sandor gave her space, mindful that she had lost everything. Her father, now her mother and brother too, if the tales held truth. He said little, but once, when she broke down in sobs beside a dried stream, he knelt and placed a hand on her shoulder. She clung to his arm, weeping, until her tears subsided into empty stares. Little by little, they pressed on, forging northward through the war-torn riverlands. Brigands lurked on the roads, but Sandor's imposing figure and skill at arms deterred most. Once, a band of 5 men tried to corner them near a ravaged mill, thinking to rob them. Sandor unhorsed the leader with a swift slash, then battered another aside. The rest fled. Sansa watched, horror-stricken but unhurt. She had no illusions left about the world beyond castle walls. War had made beasts of many. Weeks passed in this grim pilgrimage. Sansa's once delicate hands grew calloused from riding, her face sunburned. She was no warrior, but she found a toughness within herself she never imagined. Sandor noted it with silent approval. She no longer flinched at every shout or distant scream, though her eyes still showed sorrow for what they witnessed. He hunted small game for food, occasionally traded with traveling peddlers. Coin ran short, forcing him to offer tasks or the threat of his sword to secure lodging. Yet even in these hardships, a strange accord grew between them, an unspoken bond that neither would name. They skirted the edges of Harrenhal, hearing that the ruined fortress now changed hands frequently. At times, they glimpsed columns of soldiers bearing Bolton sigils or even men sworn to Peter Baelish. The realm's loyalties were splintered beyond recognition. Sansa asked if perhaps they should seek out her Aunt Lisa in the Vale, but rumors said the high passes were closed, the bloody gates sealed. They might freeze in the mountains or be turned away, so they drifted. Sandor found himself wondering if a quiet life in the far reaches of the north or across the narrow sea might be possible. If the war had truly taken all Sansa's kin, she had no house to claim her. She was alone as he was. Perhaps 2 solitary souls could find a patch of ground untroubled by kings and crowns. At night, staring into the dying embers of a campfire, he considered that possibility more than once. But he knew the realm rarely left those with Stark blood in peace. Their journey eventually brought them near the Trident's wide waters. Autumn chills crept in, painting the leaves in gold and crimson. One late afternoon, they stumbled upon a small sept built by the riverbank, its stone walls half-cracked and moss-covered. The old septon living there offered hospitality. Simple bread, salted fish, and a roof for the night. Sansa's eyes lit with gratitude at the chance to pray in the modest September Sandor. Wary, hung back, but the septon, an old man named Maribald, seemed harmless enough. He asked few questions, sensing they were fugitives of war, and extended kindness instead. Sansa knelt before the 7 carved idols, her hands clasped, tears slipping down her cheeks. Sandor leaned against a wall, arms folded, letting her have her moment. Septon Maribald approached him quietly. "The lady has seen hardships," the septon said in a gentle voice. Sandor only grunted. He expected a sermon, but Maribald merely sighed. "We've all seen too much this war. The gods weep for us, or so I'd like to believe. I have little enough to offer but counsel and a blessing. He glanced at Sandor's scarred face, the tension in his posture. You carry many burdens, my son. Sandor bristled. I'm no son to the faith. Maribald inclined his head in acceptance. Even so, sometimes a kind word can ease a troubled spirit. Sandor said nothing, and the septon drifted away. Soon, Sansa joined them, her eyes red-rimmed. She thanked Maribald for his hospitality, voice low. We'll leave in the morning, she said. We don't want to bring trouble upon you. That evening, they ate fish stew by the hearth, the septon humming a soft hymn. Sansa listened, silent. Sandor cleaned his dagger, half listening for any sign of approaching men. None came. In the quiet, the old septon asked if they had heard the latest tidings, how the Lannisters and Tyrells now held King's Landing, how the north was overrun by Bolton forces, how the Greyjoys were battered on the seas, and how rumors spoke of dragons far to the east. Sansa looked weary at each mention of the warring houses. Sandor felt her mood, a numb acceptance that Westeros might never know peace. Morning dawned cool and damp. The septon gave them a small loaf of bread and a waterskin. Sansa, moved by the kindness, left a few silver coins from her hidden stash. Then they departed, following a path north along the river. The water shimmered beneath the rising sun, birds flitting above. Sansa's posture was subdued. Sandor asked if she was well. She managed a faint smile. Praying doesn't change what's lost, she said. But it reminds me I can still hope for something better. He nodded, unsure how to answer. He had seldom found solace in prayer, only in steel. They traveled onward until midday when an unexpected sight halted them. A small band of riders emerged from behind a stand of willow trees, blocking the path. 6 men, armed and grim-faced. At their head was a tall archer with a patch over one eye. Behind him rode a bannerless knight. Their gear looked worn, but Sandor sensed discipline in the way they spaced their horses. Brotherhood without banners, perhaps? Or another band of outlaws? Sansa stiffened, glancing at Sandor. He rested a hand on his sword hilt. The one-eyed man raised a hand in greeting. We mean no harm, he called. But we'd have a word, if you please. Sandor narrowed his eyes. I'm not in the mood for parley. The man offered a tight smile. You're a tall fellow, friend. We've heard tales of a big man traveling with a red-haired girl. His gaze flicked to Sansa. We're not thieves unless you ride for the Lannisters. Sansa exhaled softly, tension in her posture. We do not, she said. Leave us be. One of the men in the group, a lean figure in a tattered cloak, squinted at Sandor's face. Recognition sparked in his eyes. That's the Hound, he hissed. The archer's expression shifted. The Hound? Another man spat. Didn't he serve the Lannisters? He's a bloody wolf in dog's clothing if so. Sandor's grip tightened on the hilt. He had no desire for a fight outnumbered 6-2, especially not with Sansa to protect. But neither would he surrender meekly. Sansa spoke up, voice trembling but clear. He doesn't serve them. He saved me from King's Landing. He's no friend to the Lannisters. That admission startled the group. They exchanged glances. The archer frowned thoughtfully as if measuring her truthfulness. The girl speaks like a highborn lady. Are you truly who I think you are? Sansa looked away, drawing her hood closer. Sandor scowled. She's none of your concern. Stand aside. They did not move. The tension in the air crackled. Then the tattered cloakman sighed. We're not your foes, he said, trying for a calming tone. We stand against the lions and any who prey on the small folk. But the Hound's reputation, he trailed off, uncertain. The archer studied Sansa again, then looked to Sandor. If you've truly broken from the Lannisters, perhaps we share common cause. The Riverlands are in chaos, and we do what we can to protect the innocent. Come with us to our camp and speak with our leader. Maybe we can help each other. Sandor ground his teeth. He did not trust them. Then again, 6 armed riders had them at a disadvantage. Perhaps it was better than a direct clash that might see Sansa harmed. He glanced at her. Fear shone in her eyes, but also a flicker of curiosity. All right, he said at last, voice grim. But no tricks. If you try, I'll carve you up. The men led them along a narrow forest path, eventually arriving at a hidden encampment tucked in a hollow near the river. More riders milled about, along with weary-looking villagers who might have sought the Brotherhood's protection. Sandor recognized scattered symbols, men from various houses who had lost faith in lords. A lean youth offered to take their horses. Sandor refused to relinquish his sword, and the archer shrugged. Fine, but mind your temper. They guided him and Sansa to a large pavilion made of mismatched canvas. Inside, a man with a worn surcoat waited, an old warhammer at his side. He had short, thinning hair and tired eyes. Near him stood a red-haired priest. Sandor stiffened, recalling the talk of Thuras of Mir and Beric Dondarrion. But these men were different, older, perhaps, and led by someone else. The man with the hammer inclined his head. I am Helmond Stone, once a soldier of the Trident. We've kept the Brotherhood's ways since Lord Beric vanished. My men say you're the Hound and you travel with a young lady. Is that so? Sansa stepped forward, face set in quiet dignity. She drew back her hood, revealing her identity. I am Sansa Stark, she said, the words carrying a kind of resigned strength. He saved me from King's Landing. We wish only to pass in peace. A low murmur spread among the assembled. The name Stark still carried weight, even in these desperate times. Helmond Stone nodded slowly. The North suffers grievously, he said. I'm sorry for your losses. If you're truly foes of the Lannisters, we have no quarrel. He gestured for them to sit on crude stools. A servant offered bread and thin ale. Cautiously, Sansa took a cup. Sandor remained standing, arms folded. Helmond explained that the old brotherhood had fractured after the Red Wedding, with Beric and Thuras rumored dead or dispersed. Various pockets of outlaws still fought for the small folk, resisting the Lannisters, the Freys, or any marauders. But they lacked unity. We do what we can, Helmond said heavily. Though times grow darker every day. You're welcome to stay among us for a spell, Lady Stark. We can offer some protection. His gaze slid to Sandor. But the Hound, many here recall your service to Joffrey. You might not find easy friends. Sandor's lip curled. I don't need friends. Sansa set a hand on his arm. We appreciate your offer, she said quietly. But we must decide our path. We can't remain hidden forever. A hush fell. Helmond spread his hands. The girl is free to choose. The Lannisters have set bounties on any Stark who survived. Riding alone invites peril. With us, at least you'd have watchful blades around you. Sansa looked at Sandor, questions in her gaze. He studied the ragtag band. Some seemed earnest in their desire to protect the weak, others looked like men who had done dark deeds in war's name. He wasn't sure if they should trust them. But the war-torn roads offered little else. For a moment, he considered this might be a decent place for Sansa to remain safely while he scouted the land for a better haven. Yet the thought of leaving her in uncertain hands roused an uneasy twist in his gut. He turned to her. It's your choice, he said gruffly. If you stay, I'll stay. If you ride on, I'll ride with you. His words surprised him, but once spoken, he did not retract them. She studied his scarred face, a tremor passing over her features. Then she nodded. We stay for now, she murmured. At least until we've learned if there's anywhere safer. Helmond Stone let out a breath. Then welcome, he said, though his expression remained guarded. We ask only that you abide by our rules, no robbing, no killing innocents, no sowing discord. We share what we have, such as it is. Sandor gave a curt nod. Sansa bowed her head in polite acknowledgement. So they settled among the Brotherhood's remnants, in a camp of wanderers and fighters who swore they battled for a just cause. It was a strange alliance for the Hound, who had spent most of his life serving kings he despised. Yet if it meant Sansa had some respite, so be it. Over the days that followed, they helped gather food, tended to the wounded. Sansa assisted with sewing up cuts, her delicate hands learning rough tasks with surprising grace. Sandor took patrol shifts, warding off brigands or fry scouts. Many of the outlaws distrusted him, but a few recognized his skill and grudgingly accepted his presence. On quiet evenings, Sansa would sit near the central fire, singing soft northern songs that lingered in the smoky air. The outlaws would grow hushed, listening with faraway looks. Sandor, leaning on a tree trunk at the edge of the glow, watched her. She was still too thin, her eyes carrying sorrow, but sometimes a faint smile curved her lips when she saw children dancing to her tunes. The war had stolen her childhood, but a fragile hope flickered in her voice. In those moments, Sandor recalled the forge fires he had once feared, how he had tempered himself until the terror became strength. Sansa was forging her own steel, less visible but no less real. And though he told himself he was no knight, no savior, he realized she had given him a new purpose. Protecting her meant protecting something untainted by the cruelty of lords and kings. Perhaps it did not make him a good man, but it was enough. Weeks passed. Whispers of new turmoil reached them. Word arrived that the Lannisters sought to strengthen their grip on the Riverlands, sending more troops. A battered messenger spoke of knights wearing the Hound's old sigil, black dogs on yellow, now commanded by some cousin of the Cleganes. Sandor scoffed. Another cur off Tywin's leash. Meanwhile, King's Landing reeled under rumors that the Targaryen girl across the sea had dragons and an army. The realm teetered. Sansa listened to every scrap of news, searching for mention of Arya or Bran. Any of her siblings. Nothing came. She grew silent once more, burying her grief beneath outward composure. Late one afternoon, while Sandor patrolled the forest outskirts, he heard hoofbeats approaching. He crouched behind a fallen log, sword at the ready. From the dappled shadows emerged a small company of mounted men in Lannister livery, scanning the trees as if hunting. One called out, "The bounty stands! 50 gold dragons for the Hound, 100 for the Stark girl." Spread out. Sandor's jaw tightened. So Tywin's search had reached even here, or perhaps it was King Joffrey's decree. Either way, the net was tightening. He waited until they had passed, then returned to the camp. Sansa was helping stir a pot of stew. He took her aside, ignoring the curious glances of the outlaws. Quietly, he explained the riders he had seen. Her face paled. She glanced around the encampment. "We'll bring death to these people if we stay," she whispered. "They're good to us, some of them. We can't repay them with slaughter." Sandor nodded. He had reached the same conclusion. Before nightfall, they spoke to Helmond Stone, who grimaced but did not try to stop them. "We'll move our camp regardless," he said. "Go if you must. The Lannisters have their hands in every corner of the realm, but maybe you'll find a path through the chaos." At dusk, they departed quietly, laden with what little they possessed: 2 horses, a few days' worth of provisions, their cloaks and arms. The outlaws watched them vanish into the thickening shadows, some with regret, others with relief. Sansa turned back once, raising a hand in a solemn farewell. Then the forest swallowed them. They rode west, away from the Trident, aiming for the hills that led toward the neck. Perhaps they could slip past the Freys and Boltons, reach the wilderness of the north. The journey would be perilous, but fewer armies patrolled those swampy regions. Nights grew colder, the leaves falling in drifts of red and gold, and they huddled under blankets for warmth. Sandor sometimes caught her looking at him with searching eyes, as if marveling that he had become her companion instead of her captor. One crisp morning, the first frost of the season sparkled on the grass. Sansa's breath fogged in the chill air. They set about packing their bedrolls when they heard the distant baying of hounds. Sandor stiffened. The sound carried on the wind, echoing through the stand of pines. Sansa's gaze darted to him, alarm in her eyes. "They're tracking us," she breathed. He nodded, jaw tight. "Likely Lannister dogs. We move fast or we fight." They saddled up and rode north at a hard pace, weaving among the trees. The barking grew louder. After a half-league, they emerged onto a narrow lane. The ground was rough, scattered with fallen branches. They urged their mounts into a canter. Sansa clung to the reins, trying to keep up. Behind them, the hound's howls drew closer. Then came the sound of hoofbeats, riders. Sandor cursed under his breath. The lane curved sharply. On the far side of the bend, a group of men on horseback appeared. 7 of them, with hounds snapping at their side. Lannister crests gleamed in the weak sunlight. The riders spotted them and shouted. Sansa paled, reining in her horse. Sandor drew his sword. "Ride on," he barked to her. "I'll hold them." She looked at him in horror. "I won't leave you to fight them alone." He scowled. "It's not a choice, girl. You want to be taken back to Joffrey's cage." She hesitated, tears of fear welling. Then she gave a helpless nod and spurred her horse, speeding past the men on the edge of the lane. One lunged to grab her reins, but Sandor barreled in, knocking the man aside with a slash that left him screaming. The other riders fanned out, 2 pursuing Sansa, for turning on Sandor. Steel rang in the chilly air. Sandor met the first rider's spear with a parry, twisting in the saddle to disarm him. The second attacked from behind, aiming a flail at Sandor's side. He angled away, feeling the chain rattle against his armor. With a guttural snarl, he severed the flail's chain and sliced open the rider's thigh. Blood sprayed. The man tumbled from his horse. Another rider thrust a sword at Sandor's neck. Sandor leaned low, feeling the blade skim over his hair, and drove his own weapon under the attacker's armpit. The rider spasmed and fell. One remained. The hounds leapt at Sandor's horse, snapping viciously. He kicked one aside, but the other latched onto the horse's flank, making it rear and shriek. The last rider seized the opportunity, charging with lance leveled. Sandor's horse bucked wildly, nearly unseating him. He rolled from the saddle at the last second, landing hard on the ground. Pain flared in his ribs. The rider thundered past. Sandor scrambled to his feet, sword raised. The hound still snarled at him, foam flying from its jaws. He slashed at the beast, the blade striking true. He yelped and fell. Then the mounted knight wheeled around for another pass, lowering his lance with deadly intent. Sandor spat blood, bracing himself. At the critical moment, he sidestepped the lance, grabbed it with his free hand, and yanked with all his strength. The knight lost balance and tumbled from the saddle. They grappled in the dirt, exchanging savage blows. The man tried to draw a dagger, but Sandor headbutted him, ignoring the flash of pain in his own skull. Seizing the chance, he sank his sword through the knight's breastplate with a wet crunch. The man went limp. A hush fell, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded hound and the wheezing of a dying rider nearby. Sandor stood, chest heaving, scanning for more threats. None rose. Blood dripped from his sword. He wiped it on the fallen knight's cloak, then spat on the ground. He retrieved his shaken horse, which snorted in panic but did not bolt. Glancing down the road, he saw no sign of Sansa or the two who had chased her. Cursing violently under his breath, he mounted and galloped in the direction they had gone, the lane winding through the pines. The blood pounding in his ears dulled all else. He imagined Sansa shrieking as men dragged her away. Anger and a bitter sort of dread coiled in his gut. He had told her to ride on, but the idea she might be captured galled him like a fresh wound. He urged his horse faster, ignoring the protest of his battered ribs. After a quarter league, he found one man's horse collapsed in the brush, flanks heaving, riderless. A few steps further, he saw a second mount lying in a pool of blood, arrow protruding from its neck. Surprised, he scanned the trees. No sign of Sansa. Then a figure rose behind a fallen log, Sansa, trembling, clutching a short bow in her hands. Her face was ashen, tears streaking her cheeks. She stared at the dead horse in horror. Sandor reined in, dismounting quickly. "Girl," he barked, scanning for the riders. They were nowhere to be seen. "What happened?" She swallowed hard, struggling to speak. They cornered me here, tried to pull me down. One dismounted, the other circled. He had a bow. There was an arrow on the ground from one of them. I picked it up, somehow notched it. He was going to kill me, so she sobbed, voice cracking, I shot the horse. I didn't know what else he felt, pinned the man. The other tried to grab me, but she collapsed into ragged sobs, the bow slipping from her fingers. Sandor reached her side, scanning the area more thoroughly. A man's body half stuck under the dead horse, neck twisted at an impossible angle. Another set of footprints led off into the trees, perhaps the second rider fled. Danger might still lurk, but for the moment they were free. Sansa's entire frame shook. With an awkward gentleness, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did what you had to," he said, his gruff voice strangely soft. She buried her face in her hands, tears leaking through her fingers. "I never wanted to kill anything," she gasped. But he would have. Sandor understood. Death had come for her, and she fought back. He knew that guilt, that first kill that shattered innocence. He drew her to her feet, letting her lean on him. "Come," he said. "We need to ride on before more hounds follow." She nodded, tears still slipping down her cheeks, but her grip steadied on his arm. They found her horse a short distance away, spooked but unhurt. Sandor helped her mount, then took the lead, guiding them off the lane into the forest's deeper cover. They rode in tense silence. At last, as the sky dimmed, they halted to rest in a grove of willows by a winding stream. Sansa dismounted stiffly, face etched with sorrow and exhaustion. Sandor tethered the horses. For a while, neither spoke. Sansa stared into the running water while Sandor gathered wood for a small fire. When at last the flames crackled, she whispered, "I feel sick. Is this how it starts? Learning to kill, then it gets easier?" She sounded both horrified and resigned. Sandor exhaled, seating himself near her. "Sometimes it does," he admitted. "But you did what you must to live. That's no sin, even if it haunts you." He paused, searching for words. "The realm is full of brutes. If you want to survive, you fight back or you run. You're not like them, girl. Remember that." She shuddered, tears gleaming. Then, with a small sob, she turned and buried her face against his shoulder. For an instant, he stiffened. Slowly, he lifted an arm to encircle her, letting her cry. He gazed into the flames, the heat dancing across his scar, thinking how, in another life, she might have been safe in Winterfell, never forced to bloody her hands. Yet here they were, two lost souls bound by necessity. He held her until her sobs quieted. Night settled, the fire crackled, and the wind rustled the willow branches. Sansa fell into a restless sleep, her head pillowed on a folded cloak. Sandor remained awake, sword in hand, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of more pursuit. If they survived this war, it would be through tooth and claw, forging a path beyond the reach of kings. He recalled how he once believed that only his vengeance against Gregor mattered. Now he had found another purpose. He was the realm's fiercest warrior, forged by fire and unafraid of the night's terrors, but for the first time he also carried the fragile hope of another in his keeping. In the distance, wolves howled under the moonlight, a lonely echo in a fractured land. Sandor listened, feeling the weight of the road yet to come. He set his jaw, determined to carve out a sliver of safety if he could. No matter if the realm named him outlaw, killer, or traitor. If the war had taught him one thing, it was that true oaths were the ones a man made to himself. He would not fail her. Let the lords and queens rage in their high towers. The Hound, free of old ghosts, would walk his own path, sword in hand and fear behind him.